Good morning. It's been an interesting couple of series that we've done. So we did the God Is series a couple months back. And for those that weren't a part of that, I highly recommend you go back and look at it. We talked about God is God. And one of the big things about that is you're not. So maybe you should listen. That God is holy. That God is omnipresent. That God is omnipotent. God is omniscient. Faithful, patient, love, merciful. He's our provider. He's gracious and unchanging. And that's just the attributes that we talked about during that series. There's a whole bunch of other things that you can delve into a little bit deeper. But the point being is that's what we hit. So we also came along back behind that and said, okay, in Ephesians 5, 1 and 2, it says this: imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children. Live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. He loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God. And let's look at it in the Amplified there, Andy. Therefore, become imitators of God, copy him, and follow his example. As well-beloved children, imitate their father. I mean, how many of you have had kids and you catch your kids imitating you? And there's things I catch myself at today. Things my dad did. And it's like, why we pick up things and we don't even know we pick it up. And yet, we have to be somewhat intentional sometimes when we're trying to pick those things up from God. So let's look at, he also talked about holy. In 1 Peter 1, 15 and 16, it says, but now you must be holy in everything you do, just as God who chose you is holy. And it's just this call to holiness. And, a lot of the problems that we have in the world today would go away if all we did was try to be holy. Not to make necessarily the world holy, but if we're holy. To be present. Ecclesiastes 4, 9 through 12. It says, two people are better than one, for they can help each other succeed. If one person falls, the other one can reach out and help. But someone who falls alone is in real trouble. Likewise, two people lying close together can keep each other warm. But how can one be warm alone? A person standing alone can be attacked and defeated. But the two can stand back to back and conquer. Three are even better, for a triple-braided cord is not easily broken. And we've talked about, encouraging you to come to service. And that's part of it. But you can be in this room and not be present. You have to let people in on your life and vice versa. And you have to be here for the people that need to hear from you on that day. And the ones online, I would encourage you, you need to build those relationships to where you are talking to somebody, that you're not out there on an island. Because like it says, if you fall, you fall alone. We are to walk in his power. Ephesians 6, 10 through 12 says, a final word, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. And just the idea is, we're supposed to be mighty in the Lord, not in ourselves. Many times we will sit there and we try to do something. We feel God's called us to do something. And a lot of times if we're not careful, we take off and we want to run with that. And we want to do it in our power. And then we end up going, man, this is harder than I thought. But it's because a lot of times we're working at it, trying to do it on our own. To grow in knowledge, Ephesians 1, 16 through 23, says, I have not stopped thanking God for you. I pray for you constantly, asking God, the glorious Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, to give you spiritual wisdom, insight into that you might grow in your knowledge of God. I pray that your hearts will be flooded with a light so you can understand with confident hope he has given you to those he has called, his holy people who are his rich and glorious inheritance. I also pray that you will understand the incredible greatness of God's power for us who believe in him. This is the same mighty power that raised Christ from the dead and seated him in the place of honor at God's right hand in the heavenly realms. Now he is far above any ruler or authority or power or leader or anything else, not only in this world, but also in the world to come. God has put all things under the authority of Christ, who has made him head over all things to the benefit of the church. And the church is his body, is made full and complete by Christ, who fills all things everywhere with himself. And this is one thing I would challenge you with as far as that coming into the knowledge of Christ. It's not you look at a scripture one day and, okay, this is all that it means. You are going to, through life, you're going to see different facets of what that looks like in your life. One day it may look like it's saying this to you. Another day it may be saying this. It's all the same. It's the same word. But sometimes God reveals things to us at different seasons of our life because we need that for that season. And I would just encourage you, don't think you know so much. You know, one of the things that I think we can struggle with sometimes is we can be blinded because we think, okay, this is what it means, and we get regimented in it, and God's sitting there going, no, I've got more than that, and we have to be open to that. Faithful, we looked at Proverbs 28:20, and it says that faithful man will abound with blessings, but he who hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. And it's just this idea that sometimes we get in such a big hurry about things, and we think, okay, I can take this shortcut, or I don't need to do this day. I can do it another day, or maybe I'll get to it another day. But you have to be faithful in what God's called you to on a daily basis. We talked about patience in Colossians 3:12. It says, since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. It is an intentional thing that you have to do. Most of you, when we had that message, probably went home that week and your patience was tried over and over again. And it's one of those things, it's a choice. And sometimes that choice is hard. But if we're intentional about it when we get up in the morning, your day is going to go better. And you're going to sit there and go, okay, I'm not going to be as patient right here. I need to get my attitude back. It's not the other person you're trying to fix, it's yourself. And then we talked about love. In Ephesians 5:1-2, we read this earlier. And this is the amplified version of that. It says, therefore become imitators of God, copy him, and follow his example. As well, beloved children, imitate their father and walk continually in love. That is value one another, practice empathy and compassion. We have to actually practice that sometimes. Because sometimes we can sit there and we'll say, well, they deserved what they got. You know, one of my mom's famous things that she would tell us, well, you made your bed, now lie in it. And sometimes if we're not careful, we can have that same attitude towards other people. But listen to what the rest of this what it says. Unselfishly seeking the best for others, just as Christ also loved you and gave himself for us, an offering and sacrifice to God, slain for you so that it became a fragrant, sweet fragrance. But again, it's that whole thing. If we really love those around us, a lot of what they do that irritates us will go away. And it's one of those things we like to hear that God loves us no matter what we do. Sometimes we have a hard time doing that with other people. And everything we've been talking about for the last 3 or 4 months now is based on this love thing. Because if you don't have love, you're not going to be able to do any of the rest of it. We talked about merciful in Micah 6:8. Know, O people, the Lord has told you what is good and what he requires of you, to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So it's telling us again, walk with mercy. But part of that is we have to become humbly before the Lord and say, okay, this is what your word says. Even though I don't want to show mercy, I'm going to. And then in Proverbs 11:17 in the Amplified, it says this. It's actually a benefit to us about being merciful. And it says, a merciful and generous man benefits his soul, for his behavior returns to bless him. But the cruel and callous man does not, he does himself harm. Again, how many times have we seen people that have grown bitter in their life? And a lot of times when you see that, you're going to see that followed with sickness. You're going to see that followed with different things in their bodies and in their minds because they just can't get over that hump. Not trying to make light of that, because there are things that I understand, injuries happen. All of us have been injured at some point in time. But you have to realize that everybody else has too, and that you need to be merciful to them when they're in that time. We talked about giving. In 2 Corinthians 6, 9 through 12, it says, "But this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that you, always having sufficiency in all things, may have an abundance for every good work. As it is written, he has dispersed abroad, he has given to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. Now may he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food supply and multiply the seed that you have sown and increase the fruits of your righteousness, while you have been enriched in everything for all liberality, which causes thanksgiving through all of us to God. For the administration of service is not only supplies the needs of the saints, but also is abounding through with many thanksgivings to God." One of the versions that talks about that you can have a surplus and that you can bless other people. And sometimes if we're not careful, we're sitting there going, I'm grabbing all this money. It's all mine. And we don't realize that God has given you money sometimes to bless other people. He may even ask you to do it when you don't think that you have all that excess. Or he may ask you, and even things like time and help. There are different ways to give. And then we talked about graciousness. And I'm just going to summarize this one because it's fairly long. But we talked about David showing mercy to Jonathan's son. Now, in that time frame, as for those that were here, you remember that they typically, when one king took over for another king that was not a blood relative, the first thing you did is you went out and killed his family off. There would be no inheritance for them at all, so there wouldn't be this uprising that people would try to reinstate that family. And yet David doesn't do that. He hunts for him, has people go out and find where he's at and brings him in. And I'm sure that had to be a tough place to be at. You're coming in, the king's called you in, and you know what normally happens. And yet that wasn't David's heart. He says, you're going to be sitting on my table. I've got a place for you at the king's table. Not only that, I'm going to give you everything that your family had. All the property, all the goods, it's all going to be yours. That is a really gracious heart for him to have had. He showed him mercy, but then he sits there and just kept blessing him. So today we're going to wrap up the follow series. We're going to talk about consistency in all areas. So if you look back at all these things that we've been talking about, most of us probably struggled in some avenue in 1, 2, maybe 12 of these areas. Simply because when you sit there and you look at it and you think, okay, I'm not as gracious as I thought, or I don't really show mercy sometimes. And today we're going to talk about, but you need to do that and do it consistently. 1 Corinthians 15:58 says, "So my dear brothers and sisters, be strong and immovable. Always work enthusiastically for the Lord, for you know that nothing you do for the Lord is useless." So it's this idea of, sometimes we pray for something, or maybe we are sitting there believing for something, and that idea of continue to do that. Maybe you do service, like we've got people today, we've got people on camera, we've got people on computer. Or maybe you're back with the kids. Being consistent in that is a big deal because people are counting on you, okay? But also when you're in the world, it's the same thing. People are watching you. Whether you think they are or not, they are. And you need to be consistent, not just some of the time, but all the time. Ephesians 4:1-6 says this: "Therefore I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling, for you have been called by God. Always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowances for each other's faults because of your love. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. For there is one body and one Spirit, just as you have been called to one glorious hope for the future." And you look at that and you start dissecting that a little bit. It says always live worthy of your calling. Do we do that? It says to always be humble. And part of being humble sometimes is to not think you're right all the time. A lot of us sometimes we think that we're so right that the other person is so wrong, and we won't even take the time to listen to them. There are times when you can both actually be right, even though you're not looking at it the same way. If you just take time to have a conversation, you take time to see where they're coming from. We each have different life experiences. But it says also to always be gentle. You know, and again, it's one of those things. Are we always gentle with people? Or do we tend to get harsh at different times? It talks about being patient again with others. And this is, I think, the biggest one for me is make allowances for other people's faults. It's like, okay, people are going to fail you. People are going to maybe say something in the wrong way, or they may do something in the wrong way. But he's sitting there telling us, make allowances for that. And if you can kind of make allowances for that, sometimes that will save off the attitude of anger and frustration if you just make that one change there. And going back to what I said earlier, if you don't love people, you're probably not going to be able to do any of that. This is not going to happen. You may try to do it in your own strength. You can think, oh, I'm just going to be a good person. I'm going to show love today, but not necessarily the rest of the week. Being good isn't enough. You've got to love people where they're at. And I love the way it put it as far as it said there's one body and one Spirit. It doesn't matter which church it is. We are all one body and one Spirit. We may not all believe exactly the same doctrine, and that don't get tripped up in it. Take the time to allow for them. When it talks about God talks about he gives you different parts of the body to different, we all fit together. So a church is a little different, but they're fulfilling what they're supposed to do. Just like with us, we are fulfilling what we are called to do here at Thrive. And that's a big deal. So don't sit there and, again, humble yourselves and get on this high horse. Well, we got it all together. One, we don't. But the other thing is just sit there and go, okay, that's their role. I mean, you look at some of the different denominations and you will see they have a heart towards this. Or this denomination, it's over towards this. Neither one of them's wrong. It's just that's where God's got them, and he ministers to the people that are in their flock. The last portion of this is as far as we look at Daniel. Okay? I want to give you a little backstory with that. So Daniel was in captivity. Okay? The king had made him an administrator. And as time went on, the king noticed, you know what? Everything he does is blessed. I'm going to make him over all the other administrators. Well, some of the other administrators didn't quite like that idea. And they got their feelings hurt. And so they were trying to figure out a way to get rid of him, and they couldn't find any fault in him. But there was one thing that Daniel did a lot, is that he prayed. And they knew this. So they go to the king and they give him this story and says, you know what? You're a great king. I think for the next 30 days, why don't we sign into law that no one can pray to anyone else or anything else except to you? And the king took it hook, line, and sinker. He signs it into law. And so we're going to read Daniel 6:10, and this is when Daniel realized, he knows this law is in place, and this was his response. When Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home. He knelt down as usual in his upstairs room with his windows open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to God. And a couple of things stuck out to me. One is, here he is a prisoner. He's not asking God to release him. Here he is knowing what the king's thing is, because they specified that whoever did something was going to get thrown in the lion's den. He knows what the ramifications that are. At least by what we can see here, there is nothing that says, God protect me from the king and the lions. He just said, you know what? I'm going to give thanks for what I have. How many times do we sit there in life in a circumstance, our lion's den, something we don't see any way out of, and we spend more time praying about the item than we do about being thankful? I think there's a lot to learn about that. But the other thing is, as far as with today's message, it has to do with, all right, it doesn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and pray just like I always do, because that's what I need. And sometimes we say, okay, does consistency really matter? And it does. We're told to work hard in the workplace. And when I worked at US Air, I was up working on the back of an airplane one time, up on the tail. And I was working with this guy, and he sits there and goes, that's why I will never be a Christian. And I'm going, what are you talking about? And coming out of the break room 20 minutes late was the same group of guys that had Bible study at every break and every meal, and came out of every one 20 minutes late. And thought because, hey, we're doing what God wants us to do, we're doing a good thing, that it was okay, didn't look at it as stealing from their employer. And it spoke to them, to that man. Now, he later became a Christian. But that influence right there was a big deal. There are coworkers that I've seen before that have stated that they are a Christian, and they're deceitful. That's not a great thing. They were consistent, but in the wrong thing. They would talk sometimes about God and speak about some of the good things, but they weren't consistent in actually living it through their everyday life. And then for me, one of the things that happened in relatively recent history was I left US Air. I had went to Philip Morris. Philip Morris had closed. I'd been going to school, and this was in 2010, I think. So jobs for mechanics weren't real popular as far as openings. And I talked to this one individual, and I told him, I said, quit sending me aircraft jobs. My airplane license is on hold because I haven't worked on airplanes in the last 2 years, and it had been 7. And so he did. And then one day he sends me one. It's like, I told you not to do that. But I went ahead and read it, and it had an individual's name on the bottom of it. And it was weird because it was for Sonic Aviation and had an individual's email. I thought that was kind of odd, and I was looking at it, and I recognized the name on it. So I was actually on my way to a second interview. I stopped, and I emailed the guy back and said, I don't know if you remember me, because I'd known him when I worked in Indianapolis, and I also had known him a little bit down here. But we weren't friends. We didn't hang out with each other. And I said, don't you remember me? This is who I am. And he sends me back an email, and he says, I know exactly who you are. I know exactly what I'm getting, and yes, come in for an interview. It made a difference because I was consistent in what I did, and he knew what he's getting. And sometimes, again, when we look at ourselves with other, you never know where things can happen in life. The mechanic world is much smaller than what I thought it was at one point. And people talk and people know each other. And my point to that is it benefited me because I was consistent. And when I was thinking about this sermon, one of the things that popped in my head was a lighthouse. We've all seen lighthouses, and true, they aren't exactly this, we don't use them the way we used to. I mean, they used to shine all the time, and they had them up along the coast everywhere. And all these lighthouses would actually be painted differently from one to another one. And the reason was their charts would tell them, all right, when you see this one with this is where you're at. Because it wasn't like we had GPS or you call your mom and say, hey, where am I at? You were kind of stuck out there in the ocean. And you hoped you knew where you were at. If you had a storm or something that kind of blew you off course a little bit, you need to know. And so they got the structure that's there. They've got a lamp that sits in the top of that thing, and it would sit there and shine. Okay? There are people that they had that maintained those. And I found it interesting when I looked it up. It talked about a lot of times it was from generation to generation. They lived at the lighthouse. There weren't snow days. There weren't rain days. There weren't sick days. You need to have that thing on all the time. And just because it's a clear sky today, right now, it doesn't mean it's going to be later. So you just had it going. And when I looked at what their duties included, it says that the lighthouse keepers needed to trim the wicks. I was looking at that. It makes a difference on how you trim a wick, which I didn't know that. So, you think of an inch wide or whatever it is. See the little lanterns that we have, if you want to go old school. And by the way you trim the wick makes a difference on what the flame looks like. It makes a difference on how much fuel's burned. It makes a difference. They said that you can actually make it to where it has two flames, if you want for decoration purpose, I guess. But my point is this: it was a big deal. They also had to replenish the fuel. Okay, and at that point in time, they used oil. And they also wound the clocks, it says, and they performed cleaning of the lenses. They performed cleaning of the tower itself. If it needed painted, they were the guys that painted it. It wasn't like we call somebody else and they come in and paint it for us. And they're also there when it's foggy out, and they played a role as a weather station. They also played a role in search and rescue, believe it or not. So today, think of yourself as that lighthouse. And to everybody around you. And remember that your lighthouse is there in the storm. It's there in the calm. And you need to be consistent in what people are seeing so they can recognize it. So the question, though, does become, do you have a supply of oil? I talked about Jesus was talking about when the bridegroom returns, there were the 10 virgins. And it said 5 of them had a supply of oil beyond their lamp, and 5 of them didn't. And the 5 that didn't, it took longer than what they planned, and they go, hey, can we have some of your oil? And it's like, no, we just got enough for us. So they went out hunting for that oil and missed that opportunity to go into the feast. If we're not careful, we can find ourselves in that same place. We're waiting till we see that we need the oil, and then we're going and looking for the oil and asking God to supply things. Do it beforehand. I talked with one of our pastors in the area. His wife passed away a couple years ago, and he made this comment. I had friends that I made beforehand. I couldn't wait until I needed them to get them. And they have stood by him as he walks this journey. Again, it's that same idea. Don't wait until you think you need it. And the question is, am I living a faithful life? And do I need to polish my lens? Okay? Do I need to clean it off? Because sometimes, especially if the wick's not trimmed right, you're going to get soot on that lens. And it's going to hamper for people to see you. And if somebody's out there in a storm and they need to see some sort of light to know, this is where I'm at, this is where I need to go, it's a big deal. Do I perform maintenance on my tower? What I mean by that is, again, it's almost the same idea of the lens. Can people see my design so that they know what I am? Or have I let it run down? Have I let it get covered up in moss and just get grungy? I mean, you all seen people's yards and stuff that are not mowed, okay? Their house is sitting there, the porch is falling in, the gutter's falling off. Probably not the place you're necessarily going to go if you need help. If you've got another house sitting right beside it that at least is kept up. Again, it's not all about the outer what people, that the outside that matters, but it does in some cases. Somebody's not going to come to you if your tower is in bad repair. And I know we've talked about a lot of stuff, and we're going to close it with this. So let's bow our heads, and I understand this series could have been really heavy, because you could look at it and say, I don't do this well, I don't do this well. And that's what the enemy wants you to believe. But at the same time, you have to be able to go and look at that stuff and say, God, help me. Help me in this area. Help me to be more gracious. Help me to love others. And if I was to ask you on an individual case, is your life holy? Are you present with other people? Do you walk in His power? Are you growing in your knowledge of God? Are you faithful? Are you patient? Are you loving? Are you merciful? Are you giving? Again, in that list we read earlier. Most of us, I think, would probably say that through this series, we've found some areas that we need some help with. And so if you got some areas like that, just go ahead and look up at me, because I was actually not going to do this portion, and I felt God say it needs to be a physical act. That you are acknowledging that I struggle in these areas. And Lord, I need your help. So we're going to close in prayer.